Hi, I'm Gail Sokol, and on today's show, we're going to be discussing quick breads.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
So, quick breads. We all love them. We all have eaten them all our lives. And you're asking, well, what's a quick bread? Well, a quick bread is anything that can be quickly baked in the oven, usually uses chemical leaveners like baking powder and baking soda, and includes such items as muffins. So think blueberry muffin, corn muffin, any type of muffin you can come up with, cornbread, biscuits, scones, coffee cakes, banana bread, date nut bread, zucchini bread. Those are all quick breads, and they're super easy to make. And I got to tell you a story. When I was vacationing in California several years ago, and I go out to eat quite a bit, but we went to this restaurant, and instead of handing us rolls to start our meal or bread and butter like most, restaurants typically do, they gave out blueberry scones. Isn't that crazy? They were so good. They were hot from the oven. They gave you some butter with it. And you know what? I've remembered that restaurant all these years. And I go to eat out a lot. Like I said before, I don't remember every restaurant that handed me bread or rolls, but I do remember these blueberry scones. So if you make quick breads, people will come and want to eat them. And they will ask you to make them again and again. So the only danger with making quick breads is you're going to be asked a lot to make them. So first and foremost, let's discuss some nuances of quick breads. First, you can make them very, very quickly, like the name implies. I could probably get a dough or batter of a quick bread together in under 20 minutes or less and get it in the oven. And I dare say you can too. They use chemical leaveners. There's no yeast at all, so you don't have to sit around, wait for a dough to rise. Chemical leaveners include things like baking powder, baking soda. So super easy to make. Now, there are three mixing methods that we do need to discuss when you do make quick breads. And your quick bread recipe, whatever it is, will follow one of these methods. So let's go over some of these methods, and some of them you may notice or recognize from previous shows that I've done. So the first one is known as the creaming method of mixing. And I have a hard time saying that several times in a row, but this is a very typical cake mixing method as well. This is when you start with butter or shortening as a solid. You let it get to room temperature so it's softened. And you cream it, and you don't add any cream to it, of course, but you put it in an electric mixer with the paddle attachment, and you add sugar, and you put it on medium speed so it gets light and fluffy. And I'm saying key words that you will see in a recipe, light and fluffy. And you will cream this mixture until it gets light and fluffy. So once this mixture gets light and fluffy, you'll start adding eggs, usually one at a time. And then incorporate them because you're building an emulsion, right? You're mixing fat-based and water-based ingredients. And then once you add your eggs, you're going to start adding things like a dairy product, a milk, a heavy cream, a buttermilk. And this is for a quick bread specifically. For a cake, it's normally milk, but buttermilk, heavy cream, maybe sour cream. So these are things that would be added to a quick bread. And next, your dry ingredients would go in last. Your dry ingredients, they would include things like flour, your chemical leaveners, baking powder, baking soda, and salt. And if you have any flavoring agents, cocoa powder, vanilla extract, lemon extract, those things would go in at this point as well. And you don't want to overmix your quick bread because we don't want to develop gluten. And we all remember what gluten is from previous shows that I've done. Gluten is the protein matrix that forms when you add water to anything that includes wheat flour. And if you overmix it, you're going to get a tough quick bread. So if I made muffins using the creaming method of mixing, my muffins would be like a baseball, all right, at a Yankees game if I overmix the gluten. And I've seen muffins that are this hard. So you could actually play ball with them. And you don't want that. So you do want to make sure that you do not overmix. And the recipe will specifically say, so pay attention to these words, mix until just blended. And what the recipe is basically saying, hey, stupid, don't overmix because you're going to get too much gluten in there. The second method that's really, really important here is known as the Muffin Method. Another hard thing to say because of the alliteration with the M's. Also known as the two-bowl method. And I'm going to give you my grandmother's award-winning recipe for blueberry muffins at the end, and it does use this two-bowl method or this muffin method of mixing. So listen to the difference between the creaming method of mixing and this two-bowl or this muffin method of mixing. So this method is so simple. All you need is 2 bowls. That's it. 2 bowls. And my award-winning blueberry muffin recipe has an oil in it. There's no butter. Now, if you do want to use melted butter, you can, but the key here is that the fat is in a liquid form. And once you follow that recipe, you'll see how super easy it is. In one bowl, you put all your wet ingredients, your oil or your melted fat, and it can be any type of a neutral oil, or sometimes people do want to use melted butter for that extra, that extra flavor. Usually they're eggs, any other type of flavoring agents that might be liquid like an extract, and then milk or some form of dairy. And in the other bowl, there's their dry ingredients, flour, salt, baking powder, baking soda, and you just whisk your liquid ingredients, pour them into the dry ingredients, and then again, mix only until blended. And then divvy up this batter or whatever you're making into the pan, or in my case, I'm going to show you a muffin recipe, and bake it. Again, it's so easy. You can get this done in under 20 minutes. Honestly, you can. Anybody can do this. And our last method is known as the biscuit method of mixing. So the biscuit method of mixing, guess what you can make with these, right? One guess. Biscuits, right? So biscuits or scones would follow this recipe or this particular procedure, this mixing method. And if you notice when I describe it to you, you'll see that it's very similar to making a pie crust, like a flaky pie crust. But instead of ice water, like you would make for a flaky pie crust, remember, let's go back very quickly. Quick review, flaky pie crust, flour, a little salt, right? No chemical leaveners. And then you add butter and you cut it in with an instrument known as a pastry blender until it gets to pea-sized pieces, the fat. And then you start adding ice water. And the ice water is icy so that the fat doesn't melt. Okay, that's our pie crust recipe. Now, fast forward to biscuits. This is very similar, but instead of that ice water, we're going to be using a dairy product, a rich dairy product. Usually something with a little fat in it, like cream, whole milk, or buttermilk. And the fat or the butter, once it's mixed in, it's going to actually prevent a lot of gluten-forming proteins from tightening up and getting a lot of toughness in your biscuit. So you actually continue on when you start this method, this biscuit method. You actually take your fat and you actually cut it into your dry ingredients, your flour, your chemical leaveners, in this case. Pastry, pie crusts don't have chemical leaveners, but in this case, scones or biscuits do. You cut in your fat into pea-sized pieces or even the size of oats or little pieces of oatmeal, and then you would add your dairy product at this point. Some biscuits or scones do have eggs in them as well. It depends. And then you will mix them together very gently until a dough forms. And the recipe will probably tell you to knead the dough maybe 6 to 8 times. They'll actually give you a number of times to do this. And that's because they don't want you to over-knead. Over-kneading is equivalent to over-mixing. When you over-mix, you develop gluten. And I know I sound like a broken record, but developing that gluten really makes a difference in a tough baked good and something that you actually will love and that just sort of breaks apart. The whole purpose of this biscuit method of mixing is this fat going in between the gluten strands and actually, basically relaxing them so that they don't form as thickly and as strongly as they would, let's say, for a pizza dough or a bagel, something like that. There won't be any chewiness in your scone. If you have chewy scones, you have something wrong with your scones. So this really, really will help because the fat coats those gluten strands. So these are our 3 mixing methods for quick breads. And once you start reading recipes over and reading enough recipes over, you'll see which one of these methods they're following. It will be one of the 3. So you can actually, it's sort of cool to say, oh, this is the muffin method, or, ooh, this is the biscuit method. And you feel like, hey, I sort of know what I'm doing now. I sort of understand this baking thing. So it's sort of cool. All right, now the piece de resistance. We're going to be giving you, I'm going to be reading to you and giving you my grandmother Etta's blueberry muffins that are to die for. And they have won many awards for me at the county fair, and it started when I was a teenager. So again, this muffin method of mixing is followed in this recipe, or the 2-bowl method. And this makes about 12 to 14 standard size muffins. And you can make them, I make blueberry muffins with this particular muffin recipe. I use fresh blueberries. My grandmother and I used to actually pick fresh blueberries every summer in the Adirondacks. But right now, you can actually use frozen berries. And they don't have to be blueberries if you like strawberries or mixed berries with raspberries. They make all sorts of frozen blueberry and berry blends, raspberries, blackberries, any type of berry you want, and leave them frozen. Don't thaw them. I'll show you a trick so they don't all sink to the bottom. Okay, so listen up. Here we go. 2 cups of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon of baking powder, 4 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and a half a teaspoon of salt. You're going to whisk those together in a medium mixing bowl. So that's 1 bowl, right? There's 1 bowl right there in our 2-bowl mixing method. In our second bowl, you're going to whisk together 1 large egg, 1 cup of milk, and you know what? I don't care if it's whole milk, 2%, 1%, fat-free, almond milk, hemp milk, it could be any type of milk you want, and 1/4 cup of canola oil. So you do want a neutral oil. If you're really a diehard butter fan, melt some butter, and you can use 1/4 cup of melted butter. And you're going to whisk that in that second bowl. So now you have your 2 bowls filled. Now your dry ingredients you should also whisk together. You definitely want to make sure that your salt and your baking powder and sugar are evenly blended with your flour. So now you're going to pour your liquid ingredients into the dry ingredients and mix only until blended. I used to use a whisk for this procedure, and now I just use a rubber spatula because I think I'm a little more gentle using that rubber spatula and that gentle mixing and folding method just to get everything together. And it will turn into a batter. It'll get pretty thick. Once it's all together, I want you to toss your fresh or frozen blueberries. Remember, unthawed frozen if they are frozen. Mix them with a teaspoon of all-purpose flour. Just mix them in a separate bowl. And make sure you take your fresh berries, wash them, and dry them. I actually put them on a kitchen towel and dry them a little bit so that there's not so much, they're not waterlogged. Your frozen berries, just toss with a little flour in a separate bowl. Take 2 cups of them or any type of berry you want. I've even used quartered strawberries. You can use any type of berry you want. And then you're going to fold them into that batter. Fold them using your rubber spatula. If you don't fold them and you mix a little too vigorously, you're going to end up what I like to call Smurf muffins. You know, the Smurfs was that cartoon where they're like, these characters were like blue. Well, your muffins will be blue. And we don't want blue muffins. And you're going to preheat your oven to 400 degrees. So you should have done this beforehand. So preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And you're going to take a 12-cup muffin pan, any type you want, spray it with nonstick cooking spray. I don't like to use the muffin liners here unless you're going to maybe bring them as a gift or whatever, and you're going to give them in a big basket full. I think they climb up the sides of the muffin pan better without that muffin liner. So I spray it with nonstick cooking spray, and make sure you get your hands all over that muffin pan, and make sure you really spread that that cooking spray all around the sides because you don't want them to stick. These are spectacular muffins. And then you're going to evenly fill each muffin cup, and I like to fill them 2/3 full. So it's over half. Don't be skimpy on the batter, but don't overfill them to their overflowing, okay? So if there's any remaining batter, and it depends, some muffin pans vary, even if they're called standard size. Sometimes they're a little smaller than some others. You can spray another pan and fill in the same manner. Sometimes what I like to do is get like a tiny little Pyrex cup and put an extra, make a little cake or a little blueberry cake for myself, or a little extra on the side. So if you do have some extra batter, you can do that, or just bake off some more muffins. Now, this is what I like to do. Not everyone does this, but I really, really recommend it. Take some extra granulated sugar and sprinkle it over each muffin. Just sprinkle it over. It'll help browning. It'll make these muffins glitter like diamonds, and they will be spectacular. And you're going to put them in the oven. You cannot wait to put them in. Don't fill the muffin pan and then take an hour-long phone call or a bubble bath, because it won't work. Chemical leaveners wait for nobody. They will start reacting with the acidic ingredients, and they will actually, and here we don't have acidic ingredients, but we are using baking powder. And baking powder already has an acid in it, so all it needs is moisture and heat, and you've got carbon dioxide gas bubbles forming. And if they make their way out of the batter into the air, you have no leavening at all. So get them in the oven right away. About 20 minutes they will bake, and they should be lightly browned on top. And stick a little knife in the center of one or two muffins just to see if it comes out clean, but it should come out perfectly clean unless you've stabbed a poor blueberry, and then it may come out a little blue. So at least you know there's no batter attached to it. Take them out. Let them cool until they're lukewarm, and then take them out of that muffin pan, and they are spectacular. And they're so pretty. You can fill, I remember bringing them to a friend who was sick, and I just walked in, and she was not feeling well. But I don't think she was happy to see me at all, but she saw the basket full of muffins, and it was like, oh my gosh, they're so gorgeous. So they really, really cheered her up. So we've learned about quick breads, and I think you got a pretty good overview of what quick breads are. And they are a spectacular thing to know how to make, because it's always good to make a quick bread, even if you don't work in the restaurant industry. So if you have any questions, I'd love it if you headed on over to bakingradio.com and leave me a message. I would love to answer some of your questions on air. And if you've enjoyed the episode today, hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to leave a review, I would really, really appreciate it. Next week, we are going to be discussing rugelach.